all those happy relationships, whether it's with yourself, whether it's with certain people in your family, whether it's with your colleagues. Close your eyes and take a moment and let all those happy relationships pass by you. See the faces of all those people with whom you enjoy these wonderful relationships. Yeah? Okay. Khushbu, I'd like for you to launch the second poll so that they can agree or disagree, respond to it.
Yes, Niyati, it should be on screen.
Yes. Sorry, not this one, the second question. Okay.
I think we'll close this, Niyati, then.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Khushbu. Okay. We spoke about the happy relationships in our life. I know the question was slightly interchanged, but that's okay. We spoke about the happy relationships in our life. Now I want you to close your eyes and take a moment to visualize the difficult relationships, relationships where we are hurting, and it could be a certain aspect of our life, like work or family in totality, or it could be specific relationships in any of these areas. So take a moment to kind of think about those difficult relationships, or the difficult relationship could be with yourself. So take a moment to think about the difficult relationships that we're having. I would also request all of you all to switch on your cameras so that we can interact better. It'd be great if all of you could switch on your camera, especially because it's a session where, I'd like to see how you're responding. So please switch on your cameras. Okay. So I'm hoping that we've taken a moment to visualize our difficult relationships. I'd like for you all to take to your chat box and tell me whether you are in difficult relationships. You need not specify it. You can either say yes to saying you are in a difficult relationship. If you like to specify who that relationship is with, you can also mention that on the chat box. So you can take to the chat and you can respond to my question in the chat box. I can see also in the poll that a lot of you have said that you are in difficult relationships or are having difficulties in your relationship and hurting in some way or the other. And I can also see that you're all responding on the chat box saying that. Okay, thank you so much for being so honest. You'd like to change that, right? You'd like to change it being so difficult in your relationships. Yes? You can again use the chat box to give me a strong yes if you'd like to change all those difficult relationships. Fantastic. Okay. Very often when we say that I'm hurting in a specific relationship and I'd like to change it, or, I'd like to do or like the relationship to change, right? We keep focusing on how the other person needs to change, right? So when I say that, oh, it's very difficult for you, is it? So how do you think it can change? And people are likely to say, oh, if the person changes, everything's going to become very easy. There will be no problem at all, right? But I think what we need to understand is when we are not happy in any area of our life, in any aspect of our life, right? We've got to, the change, if we feel is necessary, that change begins with us. And that is something that we need to remember, right? So we need to change ourselves to see the change in others, to see the change in our various relationships. So it all begins with us, and we are the very center of this. And that's something we need to remember. And how do we change and enhance our relationship with ourselves as well as with others? Like we said, through understanding what emotional intelligence is and using the power of emotional intelligence. So, emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage our own emotions as well as the emotions of the people around us. And when we have a high level of emotional intelligence, it means that we are able to understand and recognize what our emotions are, understand what they mean, and how they can affect us as well as other people. Okay, and that understanding is very, very critical. So when we look at emotional intelligence, okay, there are four components of emotional intelligence. One is self-awareness. Second is self-management. Then we have social awareness, and then we have relationship management. Okay, and we're going to look at each of these aspects, understand what they are, and how we can practice this in our daily lives to enhance our relationships. Yeah. So the first is self awareness, which is the ability to recognize and identify our own emotions. So understanding what am I feeling in any situation, and then asking myself, why am I feeling this? You know, very often we only get stuck on what I'm feeling. Something happened, I'm angry. Something happened, I'm sad. We never go to asking ourselves, okay, what has really hurt me? Why am I sad? Or what about this situation? Or what about, what someone has said to me has actually hurt me? So when we talk about self awareness, it is understanding what I'm feeling and then understanding why am I feeling that. And understanding that why is very, very important. What has been triggered in me and what is making me feel like this is just as important to understand. Yeah. How do we practice self awareness? I think a fantastic way of practicing self awareness is to engage in daily reflection, right? So you've gone through your day and then you sit back and reflect on how that day was and think about the various situations you encountered through the day and how you responded to those situations and why you responded to them like that. And sometimes just thinking can be very difficult for us to do. And therefore, I think this tool that I've put up here could be an interesting tool that you could use when you want to engage in self reflection, which is whatever situation that you're thinking about, put down what the situation is, think back to that situation and think about, what were the thoughts and what were the emotions at that point in time, and then think about how did you respond in that situation, what was your behavior in that situation. And after you've thought about all of it, ask yourself, now that I'm looking at this in hindsight, now that I've been through the experience and I'm looking at it and reflecting on it, is this really how I wanted to behave? Would I behave differently the next time the situation happens? So engaging in that kind of thought process makes us extremely aware, one, and second, also prepares us when we are going to kind of encounter a similar situation the next time. So it's not about living our life, almost on automatic mode and just going through it, but actually taking a moment every day to think about, okay, these were the difficult situations I went through. When I went through them today, be it a fight with a friend, be it an argument with your boss, be it, some difficult project that you're working on with your colleague, whatever the situation might be, go back and think about it. Think about what was going on in your mind and how you were feeling in those moments. And then finally, what was your behavior? So doing this on a daily basis is going to give you a lot of insight into the kind of situations that trigger you. At the same time, if every day I'm asking myself, should I have behaved differently? And the answer is yes, then I'm consciously putting into my mind that the next time I am experiencing a situation like this, I should not, behave in this manner, but in a different manner. So ask yourself, whether the way you behave, do you like that? And if not, then how would you have rather behaved in this situation? Okay. So that is one. Another interesting and useful way of practicing self awareness is, of course, seeking regular feedback. And especially when we are talking about, work relationships. A lot of you, I mean, when you're working, it'd be nice to know how your colleagues, how your team members, how, your seniors are looking at you, right? So it helps to go and seek regular feedback from these significant people in your life. Similarly, even in your personal relationships, going and talking and understanding, do you think that I was rude, or did you not like how I behaved? What happened? Or, constantly and regularly seeking feedback from people who are important to us. And when we seek out this feedback and receive negative feedback, I think that's where it's critical how we respond to it, right? Because every time people are not going to give us great feedback, the idea is also to get constructive feedback. And when we do receive that negative feedback, it is important to, what happens is when somebody tells you something about yourself that you don't like, the tendency is to say, no, but I just did that because. So we start justifying, we start giving excuses, and that's natural. But what we need to do, if we really want to learn and if we really want to grow, then when we go to seek out that negative feedback, what is important for us to do is understand from them, what made you say this? So if somebody says, you were highly unprofessional in that meeting, or somebody tells you, gives you feedback saying that you were very rude to me yesterday, rather than defending or giving excuses or justifying, saying, no, I wasn't rude, where was I rude, no, I didn't mean to do that, or no, I probably had something else on my mind, etc. Ask the person, okay, you thought I was rude yesterday, what made you feel like that? And hear and listen to what the person has to say, because that's telling you that when you behave a certain way, how is it being taken by others? And the minute you start understanding that and responding to that, you will be in a position and you will be able to enhance your responses and therefore your relationships. So very important to constantly gain feedback from the people around us who are important to us, and relationships that are important to us. And then take in the negative feedback, understand what and why they are saying that, and see how you can work on it. Okay, but when we are seeking this feedback, we have to be very, very open minded. We can't be dismissive or defensive. uh, Additionally, becoming aware of your unhealthy emotions and managing them. See, a lot of us, and especially today, right, given the pace of our life and everything that keeps happening around us, we do tend to feel high levels of stress and anxiety, correct? And I think it's important to identify these unhealthy emotions when we feel them, and to find a way to manage them. And when we have to manage these emotions, the important thing to understand here is that, very often the way we look at things is, because a situation happened, I'm feeling a certain way, right? So my boss, for example, wasn't happy with my work, so I'm sad. My friend shouted at me, so I'm upset. So we tend to look at it as, a situation is causing a certain kind of emotion. But what we need to understand is that it is not the situation which causes the emotion, but it is how we perceive and process the situation that causes the emotion, right? Because the same situation doesn't create the same emotion in everyone. You might do badly at something and somebody might feel very terrible about it. Another person might actually feel motivated to do better next time. So the situation doesn't create the emotion as much as how we perceive the situation creates the emotion. And when we feel stress, when we feel anxious, what's important for us to identify is, how am I perceiving this situation? What are my thoughts about the situation that are causing stress in me, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a very important meeting to go to the next day and you're feeling extremely stressed out, or you're feeling extremely anxious. uh, Now, if you ask yourself, for example, why am I stressed out? What about this situation is stressing me out? The answer might be something like, this meeting has to go well, because if it doesn't, then it's going to be terrible, and I don't know what will happen. So it has to go well, it has to go well, and I'm obsessing about it having to go well, and that is what is causing my anxiety. Now, what I need to back up here and understand is, while me wanting the meeting to go extremely well is fine, me having guarantee that this meeting is going to go well is not possible, right? Because that's not in my control. And therefore, I need to understand that while I want this meeting to go well, okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to. So, what I can do in this moment is focus on what I can control, which is prepare my best for the meeting tomorrow, right? And do the things that are in my control. But very often, when we feel stress and when we feel anxious, what happens is we're not even able to do the very things that we need to do to ensure things go well. Stress will get me so caught up that I may not even prepare for the meeting very well. So, in moments when we are feeling stressed out, when we are feeling anxious, we need to take a step back and just reflect on, why am I thinking like this? And when you get that thought, help yourself understand that, well, I can only focus on what I can control. And if I do that, most likely things are going to turn out the way I'd like them to, right? So, all of this is extremely important when we talk about self awareness. So, understanding our emotions, why we are feeling them, engaging in self reflection, and becoming aware of our unhealthy emotions. And with that, we come to the next component of EI, which is self management, right? So once I've understood what I'm feeling, the next step is being able to manage those emotions so that I'm behaving appropriately in social situations, so that I'm not doing anything that's going to cause harm to me or to the people around me, right? So the next step, like I said, is about self management, which is managing our emotions. And here, what it essentially means is understanding the difference between what a reaction is and what a response is. Okay, and we're going to talk about that now. I'd like all of y'all, I'd like to request all of y'all to please put on your videos, because I think that really helps. It'll be very, very nice if you can put on your videos and use the chat box to share your thoughts as we go along. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so like we said, just recapping very quickly, self management is managing our emotions, understanding the difference between response and reaction. Would someone like to tell me what is the difference between a response and a reaction? You can take to the chat box and tell me what you think is the difference. How do we know what's a response? How do we know what's a reaction? Would you like to answer that? If you like, you can unmute yourself and answer. Okay, let me walk you through it. So when we talk about a reaction is impulsive, a reaction is automatic, okay? And it's just almost like when the situation happens, you don't think about it, you do the first thing that you feel and you respond to the feeling. Whereas response, on the other hand, is more mindful behavior, okay, where I look at the situation, I pause. I don't just say whatever it is or do whatever it is that comes to my mind. I take a moment to pause. I process the situation. I think about, the long term and the short term outcomes of my behavior, and then I accordingly respond after understanding what the situation is all about, right? So when we talk about self management, it is about becoming conscious about responding rather than reacting. When we react, we just respond to, we just kind of act on the feeling that we are getting. But when we respond, we take that moment to actually process and think about, okay, I'm feeling like this, but how should I therefore, now what should I do about my feeling? How should I Respond so that I am taking care of and keeping in mind everything. I'm not going to cause trouble to my relationships. I'm not going to say something rude or mean. So you kind of think about everything and say and give a response which is appropriate. Okay. I can also see that a lot of people have responded to this. Response is thoughtful. Nikhil has said it's thoughtful, and unlike reaction, which is prompt. Absolutely. Romita has also said that a reaction is fast paced and impulse induced, and a response is more thought and measured. Correct. And reaction again, Sonali says, is instant. Responses after, taking a pause. I think fantastic. You have kind of given really on point responses for this. And I think if we can, train our mind over a period of time to respond rather than react, our relationships will automatically start improving. The next time your partner, your spouse, your friend says something to you don't like, rather than shouting back, or shouts at you rather than shouting back, if you actually, very kindly and nicely say, I understand that you're upset with me. Why don't you tell this to me nicely, and I'll probably, work on it, and I'll see how to work on it. The entire tone of the conversation, the entire flow of the conversation changes. But if someone shouts and then you shout back, and then they're going to shout louder and you will shout louder, and by the end of it, there's just too much shouting and the relationship is hurting. So if we can consciously, and it's easy to say, but why should I take the step? Let the other person kind of respond. No, why are they talking to me rudely? Well, that's because you want the change in your life. You want to change and enhance your relationships. So the next time somebody is rude to you, the instinct will be to be ruder. But take that pause, be mindful, and take control of the situation and change the entire course of that discussion by being kind even when they are being rude. And when I say be kind, it doesn't mean that you accept everything that they're saying. It doesn't mean that you don't put your points of view across. You put them across, but you put them across respectfully. You put them across kindly. You put them across nicely so that the other person actually listens. Okay. So self management is all about choosing response over reaction, and of course about practicing unconditional self love and self acceptance, right? I can manage myself so well in my relationships only if I'm secure within, right? And to be secure within, I have to learn to accept myself fully. And when I say fully, it means all aspects of my personality, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's not only about embracing the good parts of my life. It's not only about, embracing the good things and the good aspects about my personality, but also the bad ones, right? And it is to accept yourself without any judgment, right? So it's not to say that I'm good or bad, but to accept yourself as you are. And that does not mean that you don't want to change. That does not mean that there are not certain things that you'd like to improve on, right? But it means still accepting yourself totally to begin with, and then working on those aspects that you'd like to change. Okay, so it's extremely important to practice that kind of unconditional love and acceptance, to be able to give that to other people. And that it has to start with us for us to be able to demonstrate it to other people. Yeah. Any questions so far? Anything you'd like to add, actually, because questions we'll take up in the end, but anything you'd like to add, because we spoke about a very important concept here of unconditional love and self-acceptance. If you'd like to add anything, you can use the chat box.
Hi, Niyati.
Hi.
Yeah, Niyati, I would like to add something. So, Mohit this side.
Yes,
So,
Mohit.
basically, I was taking psychological counseling a while back, right? My psychologist told me that I have a very high emotional intelligence, right? According to that, obviously, you judge a situation and then responds back accordingly, right? But
Yes.
in a lot of conditions, in a lot of situations, I kind of have a very repulsive reaction towards certain situations. It comes automatically. Though I have a very high emotional intelligence that came out in my emotional check-in, I did not realize why these things keeps on happening with me. So the thing is, how to basically even if you are a very high emotional intelligent person, how you basically why does this keep happening in every situation? That's my question.
Right. So, Mohit, you know what happens? For some of us, we don't like arguments or fights to such an extent that we prefer avoidance. You know, I'd rather avoid the situation if that saves me the trouble of getting into an argument or having a difficult conversation. So you tend to move away and think that if it just gets sorted out on its own, that will be great. And sometimes that could work, but that's not going to work at all points in time. So when it doesn't, then you have to do the uncomfortable job of having that difficult conversation. So maybe
Got
it's, Mohit, your personality is such that you don't like unnecessary arguments or fights or, loud conversations. And therefore, you're like, it's okay if I don't say anything rather than me saying and there being a problem, which is okay. But then there are also times where you have to put your point across. And when that is the case, then you have to find a way, to get over that avoidance and tell yourself that, well, I understand that I want to avoid conflict, but that does not mean I can't put forth my point. And you have to choose between the two, and you have to choose putting forth your point sometimes as well. That makes sense,
Got
Mohit?
it. Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome. Okay, then we come to the third aspect of emotional intelligence, which is social awareness. So we've spoken about self-awareness, self-management, and now we come to social awareness, which is recognizing others' emotions and also understanding why they are feeling like that, right? So when we talk about social awareness, okay, there I think an important skill to practice is empathy. And when we say empathy, that is understanding the other person's perspective. So empathy includes actively listening to what the other person's saying, where you're listening to understand rather than to respond. You're also looking at their body language, so you're paying attention not only to what is being said, but also to the things that are not being said. You are understanding the other person's point of view and listening to them completely and understanding why they are feeling like that. And finally, it includes acknowledging the other person's emotions and responding to them. Very often when somebody comes and tells you that, oh, I'm feeling very upset about this, the tendency is to say, that's not a big deal. Why are you feeling so upset about it? But empathy is about acknowledging their emotions, saying that, okay, I can understand this is difficult on you. Let's talk about it. Right? So the minute we start practicing empathy with people around us, our relationships start improving drastically. Okay? So practicing empathy is very, very important in social awareness. Okay? Then we come to the final step, which is relationship management. So once I've understood myself, learned to manage myself, I take the step to understand other people through practicing empathy. And then finally, I get into managing my relationships, right? Because I'm able to understand other people and their perspective, their point of view. Now I figure out how I'm going to manage these various relationships in my life. And when we talk about relationship management, it is to cultivate, manage, and maintain positive and fulfilling relationships in our life. See, if we look at all aspects of our life, what we're dealing with day in and day out are people,
Then,
right? Be
so
it at
Umar,
home, be it at work.
what is happening is that
Sorry, I
right
think
now I
someone.
think you have released an offer letter saying 30K as
Hi,
the
Khushbu,
increment,
could you help me with?
something on that line. Okay, it has to.
Thank you so much. Okay. So when we talk about relationship management, like I said, it's about maintaining positive and fulfilling relationships in our life, right? And if we look at when we spoke about the different aspects of our life, be it work, be it self, be it family, we're dealing with different kinds of people. So learning to manage these relationships and using emotional intelligence in our relationships will help us have great and fulfilling and happy relationships. Okay. So the minute when we talk about enhancing relationships and when we talk about high emotional intelligence, that allows you to have effective communication, right? You're able to be very clear, you're able to be precise, concise, and you're able to put your point across. Secondly, it teaches you to be assertive because you are mindful of other people's emotions and your own. You respect your own emotions and believe that you need to stand up for what you believe in without hurting the other person. You find a way to put your point across assertively. It also teaches you active listening, right? Which is listening to understand the other person rather than respond. Most of the times we're listening only because, we want to give our answer. But this teaches us to listen to understand the other person's perspective and then respond to that. Emotional intelligence also makes us more honest. It gives us high levels of honesty because we love ourselves, we are sure of ourselves, we're secure about ourselves, so we don't find it difficult to be honest. Okay, it helps us to manage conflict in a much better manner because, again, when you are attuned to your own emotions as well as to the emotions of others, you know how to, understand, identify the problem, understand, identify the conflict, and then find a solution to it. You don't get stuck up or hung up on, why is he doing this or why is she doing this. Rather, you try to shift your focus to, how can I find a solution to this? Okay. And finally, it also teaches us to be appreciative in our relationships. When something's going good, when someone does something nice for you, it's important to say thank you. Just like when we don't like something that's happening, we're always ready to call it out saying, oh, what you did was terrible, or I hated it, or, we raise our voice sometimes. But similarly, when someone does something good for us, it's important to appreciate that as well. Okay, so in all these ways, and understanding all of this through emotional intelligence helps us to enhance our relationships, helps us to make our relationships that much better and stronger. Okay, very quickly, let's understand how this relationship management also reflects in leadership and parenting. Because when we talk about when we talk about leadership and when we talk about parenting, they're very important roles that we are playing, and we have that much influence over other people. Therefore, making these roles extremely critical. So again, emotional intelligence helps us communicate effectively. As leaders who are high on emotional intelligence, we know how to have open communication. We show respect to people. So even if we are not happy with something, even if we are, upset about something, we find a way to communicate that without disrespecting the other person. Okay. uh, Praise and appreciation. So also as leaders, to praise and appreciate the different people, deliver constructive feedback. So we're not only saying good things to them, we're also, showing and delivering negative feedback in a wonderful way. We understand our team members, and finally, we're showing empathy again. Okay, and I'm quickly going to go over the parenting tips, and then we can open up for question and answer round. Okay. So when it comes to parenting, one is building connections with our children. Second is emotion coaching, which is telling our child that it is okay to have any sort of feeling. Feelings are okay, and you can have any feeling, but how you express it is important, right? Then modeling appropriate ways to express our feelings, especially the negative ones, because children learn from watching and not by, it's not like if you tell them this is how you have to behave, they will behave like that. They learn by watching, and therefore ensuring that you're modeling the kind of behaviors you'd want them to take up. Teaching children healthy coping skills. So very often, when a child says I'm angry or I'm upset, rather than telling the child don't be angry or don't be upset, what's important is to teach them, okay, you're angry, let's work through it. How can we cope? How can we kind of work through it? And finally, we are disciplining children to teach them the right ways, the right methods, the healthy ways, rather than to punish them. Okay. So with that, we've come to the end of the session where we've talked about all the four aspects of emotional intelligence. And I'd like to open it up for questions now. You can just unmute yourselves and ask me questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Niyati, for the awesome session. Before, going towards the Q&A, I just have, two requests from the audience. So Also, we are left with one poll. So, I mean, can I launch it and, everyone can answer?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yes, I hope everyone can see on the screen. I have several fulfilling relations. You can answer it. Yes, I will end this poll. And second, we have one, feedback poll. I would also request the audience, please take a moment and, fill this one as well. Wait for 10 seconds more, then, we'll open for Q&A. Yeah, okay, thanks everyone. Just lastly, we have a feedback form in the chat box. Please do, take a moment to respond to it as well. Over to you, Niyati.
Thank you. Y'all can feel free to ask me questions now. You can unmute yourselves, and I'd love to take up any questions that you have.
Niyati, I've got a question. I heard you say that, let's say you ask yourself, why would I keep taking this step? And the answer is you want to make your life better. But where does that cycle stop? I mean, are you always going to be the person who takes the first step and you never expect the other person to take it? And is this also, does this extend to all the relationships that you have which are, let's say, bad? Are you always going to be the person who's going to have to be the bigger person, let's say the more mature person, and take that step?
Fair. I think that's a very good question, Rohit. And I think that's a question that all of us have, right? Where do we draw the line? I think the answer to that is one, that it's very personal. Okay. How much and where am I willing to take things to? I think that while a lot of people say that this is acceptable and this is not acceptable, I do feel that they are your relationships and you draw the boundary. When I talk about taking initiative, that is about when I want to see a change in a relationship. I think rather than waiting for the other person to change, I start, right? I take the initiative and I see what that is doing to my relationship. If it is improving, if it is getting better, that's great. So you take the first step, yes. But then if you feel like the other person's not in it, the other person's not responding, then I think that's a different conversation to be had. So to answer the first part, I think when we want something to change, we should try and make the change ourselves, right? Change in ourselves and see how that's kind of reflecting and how we can see that in our relationship. And very often, a lot of things just fall into place when we make that effort. But if we do realize that the person in front of us is not as invested, or in spite of me taking the efforts, I don't see reciprocation, then I think that calls for a very different conversation altogether, where you need to check in with the person and see that, are you even in it, right? So I think you need to have that open communication and honest communication, and then kind of confront them and say that, I felt like things were not going great, therefore I decided to do this. But I still feel like, in spite of me taking these efforts, I don't see much changing. And I'm not blaming you. All I'm trying to understand is, why is that the case? Is there something that you'd like to bring up? So I think that's how you could deal with it. Does that answer your question, Rohit?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Maybe I have a question too on this particular regard. So specifically, you said that the other person is trying and taking a step ahead, right? And if you don't see any response from the other side, you take a step back and have an open conversation on it, right? So particularly if this thing happens, what about the other side? Don't you think before even having an open conversation, like what is happening on the other side of things with the other side? Like I'm trying my level best to have this, taking the first step and everything, but the other side, knowing the other side's story is also important in this process. Why things are not happening, and for that, I think open conversation sometimes help. But are there any other way where open conversation is not possible? Is there any other way to know in the process why things are going wrong, even after taking multiple steps towards that?
I think, in my opinion, the best way is to confront the person and speak to them. Because rather than otherwise, what tends to happen is we kind of build a lot of stories in our mind of why the person might be responding this way, right? And I think that just opens a can of worms, because then, just knowing human tendency, we are so likely to put, so many negative thoughts on top of each other and think, oh, maybe it's because of this, maybe it's because of that. Which is why I think the best way to get the other person's perspective is from them, right? So try and understand, and that's where we practice empathy. That's where we say, let me understand your point of view. And you're doing this because the relationship is important, right? It's not, see, not every battle is fought, not, you don't do this for every relationship. There are significant relationships in our life, there are important relationships in our life, and they're, because they are important to us, we are taking these steps and we are having these conversations. So I think, Mohit, the best way to do it
Right.
is to speak to them, is to tell them that I'm here, and not, see, what happens is when we confront people, we go there to blame them. We go there to tell them this is where you're wrong, and that's where we start off on the wrong foot. When we confront them, let's, rather than telling them, I feel like you've done this, why have you done this, rather than that, check in with them. What's happening with you? I feel like you've not been yourself of late. What's happened? And then you see how the entire conversation and dialogue changes. If you
Got
go
it.
there to understand rather than to attack, the response is going to be very, very different.
Got it. Got it. Sure.
Yeah,
That was helpful. Yes. Thank you.
I'm glad. Any other questions?
Niyati, I have one question. I mean, can you suggest, some sources or, books that we can read on this topic? Because what happens usually, I mean, now I'm hearing you, everything I'm able to understand, and think to, of course, imply. But
Yeah.
then, I mean, after 2, 3 days, we forget, that we have to take action. So
Yeah.
can you, specify some books or something?
Yes, at the top of my head, I can think of how to influence people and how to make friends and influence people. I think that's
Oh,
a fantastic read. Additionally, I would really recommend a book, and this, I mean, the book is written more from a romantic relationship point of view, but I think it applies across your relationships, which is the 5 love languages. I think
I
that's a fantastic read, because that talks about, very often we feel somebody doesn't love us, but what the book tells us is everyone's love language is different. So you have to
interesting.
understand the person's love language. For me, maybe when I love somebody, my love language is probably hugging them and showing physical love. For
Right.
that person, maybe the love language is standing there for me, standing up for me. Right now, if I am judging their love language, and their love base is hugging, I'll feel, oh, this person doesn't love me. But actually, their way of showing it is different. So I think that's a fantastic read in just understanding how every human being has different love languages, and you need to understand the person's love language to see the love.
Interesting. I will definitely pick this one.
Yeah.
Any more questions, guys?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Romita.
Yeah, hi. So for example, for all the things that you were saying, a lot of them involve very cyclic conversations, right? Even if one of the participants, or say even if it's a group conversation, it usually tends to sound you're blaming, even if you use the words differently. So in the moment that there is a cyclic conversation and that 20-second pause for whatever situation reason is not possible, how do you not continue the cycle and how do you take a break and try to reconcile the conversation, but in a different direction?
Okay. So Romita, you know what? Actually, I can, if you have a situation and you want to do the conversation with me, I'm more than happy to demonstrate it. But before we come to that, I think one thing that I'd like to say is, we always feel that it's important to give a response. Okay. But actually, and give a response then and there. It's not like that. If you're not sure of what to say, it's safer to not say anything and actually admit to the fact that, sometimes when you're very angry, let's say, for example, it's okay to say, you know what, right now I'm very angry. And anything I'm going to say is going to come from that space. And I don't want to say something that I'm going to regret. So let me just cool off and come back so that I'm able to process this. And it's okay to do that. We feel like there's a need to give the response then and there, which is not the case. Saying I don't have a response for you right now is more respectful than saying something we're going to regret later. So even in the case of, when you feel like things are we're getting into a cycle and we're having the same conversation, you're saying the same thing, I'm saying the same thing, stop and say, you know what, let's take some time out, let's really process what's happened, and let's come back and talk about it. You know what I mean, Ramita?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And that's powerful, because sometimes, when we are in it, the situation looks too big. Think about how many fights you've had and 10 days later laughed about it, or said 10 days later, it wasn't even a big deal. Why did I shout so much? So giving yourself that space and time helps you put things into perspective. And that's important. Yeah.
Yes. That is great.
But if you have a specific situation, I'm more than happy to actually give you a real-time conversation if need be. So up to you.
Sure. I'll take that up actually.
So tell me what the situation is, and then I could be Romita. I could play Romita and say how you could respond to it.
Okay. So for example,
I think it'll be a lot more powerful if we do it with the video on.
Okay. Sure. Wait, just 1 second. Yeah. So, for example, let's say that there is a situation where I have a feeling that somebody on the other side is lying to me, but I don't have anything which is strong enough to say that there is a lie. But I do recognize the patterns and I see there is a lie. So the conversation probably goes something of a sort that I know you have been lying, but I don't know how to substantiate it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. That's tricky territory, because one, you feeling that the other person lying. Romita, I completely understand that sometimes there's instinct, right? But sometimes it also comes from insecurity. So the important check that you need to do is to ensure it's not coming from your, space of insecurity, and you have a fact check. There is a way that you you've seen it for real or witnessed it for real, and then you're picking it up with the person.
Yeah. So let's add more context to the situation. Let's say that I know there has been let's say there has been lies that have been occurring, but at the same time, I have found out in situations that I cannot come and tell Niyati. I cannot tell you that this is how I know that you are lying, but I do know that you are lying.
Right. So how about, rather than telling the person you're lying, maybe asking them, so you've picked it up from somewhere, right? You've picked the sense up that they're lying, and you have some information. You can't give me the information, but why not ask me questions that will lead me to the information? You know what I mean?
Yes. So for example, say that Niyati does not admit that there is a lie, but I know that there is. So there's one aspect of knowledge, and there's another aspect of confrontation or acknowledgement that for whatever reasons I did not feel like telling you this, or I was not comfortable sharing with you, but there is no acknowledgement of the fact that has happened.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There is acknowledgement, or there is acknowledgement?
There is lack of acknowledgement on the other end.
So like I said, I think asking the questions, because you have a fact check, right? So don't tell them that I know you're lying. Ask them questions which is going to lead to the fact that it is a lie. And then you can always pick up and say, but you said this earlier, now you're saying this. So if you really listen, they're likely to say something which is going to help you kind of, bring it up. But Romita, and I think that this is a very close and intimate relationship that you're talking about. And
Yes,
if
it is.
that's the case, and if lying is not something that you're okay with, I think it is, and it is a deal breaker for you, I think it's important to call that out.
Yes, that's what has been happening. I was just trying to figure out. So I mean, the situation is more a little before in time, so it's not a very recent one.
Sure.
But I think what I wanted to understand was, so if there is lack of confrontation or rather acknowledgement from the other end, which is recurring, like there are people who are really good liars, right? So they know how to build up a situation and lie to the best. So in that case, how do you? I mean, of course, calling it out and taking your own space and moving out is one of the options.
Yeah.
But the closure doesn't really happen if you don't get the other person to admit or acknowledge that breaking out part or the moving out part is the another aspect of it.
Right.
But so how does somebody be okay with the fact? Is it the power of knowledge that I know that there has been a lie? Does that give the closure, or like?
Romita, what happens is when people do things to us, no, we take it very personally.
Yeah.
In the sense that we
Social
say,
awareness.
no, we say it in terms of you're doing this to me. That means मैंने ऐसे क्या किया कि you're doing this to me.
Yeah. That's the first reaction.
What we need to understand is when someone does this to you, it's more about them than it's about you.
Yeah, it is. And I think that comes after like a couple of those conversations where you see that they are uncomfortable with acknowledgement rather than telling it to you. I think that is one space where it can be.
Absolutely. And Romita, that's your closure right there, to understand if someone's repeatedly doing this with you, okay? Choosing to be with them or not is your choice. And that's not something I'm going to comment on because like I told you also earlier, right? Everyone's deal breaker is different. What's your deal?
Yeah, you're just mentioning that a couple of minutes ago, the line drawing part.
Don't compromise on what your deal breaker is, and there is no standard for that. It's what you're okay with, what you're not okay with. And if you're not okay with it, you need to call it out. And if the other person doesn't acknowledge or admit it, it's on them. What I'm trying to tell you is they're not lying to you because there's something wrong with you. They're lying to you because there's something wrong with them. There is something that they don't know how to deal with. So it's about them more than it's about you. And understanding that is what gives us, closure. People talk about being, betrayed. People talk about, infidelity in relationships. People talk about being taken for granted in relationships. What we need to keep telling ourselves is it's terrible that that's happened to us. It's unfortunate, but it's not happened to us because of us. It's happened to us because of who they are as people. And you can't carry that on you. That's not on you. That's on them. I think understanding that, constantly reminding yourself that is what's going to give you the closure.
Yeah, I believe that should help.
I really hope it does.
Yeah, it does. It does actually. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Khushbu, do we have, I haven't checked the chat box, but yeah.
So I think we, don't have any questions. Just we'll take one moment. Any questions, guys? Then we'll close this, if not. I think, Niyati, we don't have any questions. So we'll close this.
Sure.
It was an, amazing session, very insightful. I am very sure that, we should be taking all of the actions to, ensure that we are loving ourselves, and maybe, we can take that pledge this Valentine's. So Thanks a ton. Yeah.
Most welcome. You could also share the questionnaire with them.
Yes, I did. And also, would you like to say, any closing statement for the audience? Yeah.
I think it's been wonderful interacting with all of you. And I think, like I said, that if we want to lead a certain kind of a life and we want we want to lead a healthy and fulfilling life, I think it's important to understand that it begins with us. And if we can love ourselves, we can accept ourselves unconditionally, we will find it in ourselves to extend that understanding to others as well. So if we look at all aspects of our life, like I said, it's all about relationships. And we've got to find, seek out those wonderful, healthy relationships and lead them. And that can happen through emotional intelligence. So practice it. It's not our automatic response. We're human. I understand that. But if we practice it and practice it enough times, we will be able to enhance our lives in a wonderful, wonderful way. Yeah. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much once again, Niyati.
Most
Bye bye, everyone.